Emily Carter stood by the huge glass doors of Stonebridge Corporate Tower, watching the city lights flicker like faraway stars she couldn't quite reach. At 17, she already knew how invisible people like her father were in buildings like this, how every polished floor, gleaming lobby, and spotless restroom came at the cost of her father's tired hands and silent nights. She carried his old lunchbox and a battered math notebook in her backpack, tucked under her arm as she followed him through the staff entrance. No one looked twice at the janitor's daughter when she walked these halls. Inside, the air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Her father, Robert Carter, had worked these hallways for 2 decades, pushing his mop and bucket past conference rooms where men in suits argued over million-dollar deals. Emily sometimes did her homework on the empty boardroom table while he polished brass door handles. She liked the quiet after the executives left, just her, the soft hum of the AC, and rows of empty chairs that made her feel like she was on the edge of something big. She often wondered if those glass walls would ever open for someone like her. One Thursday night, she sat cross-legged in the corner of the staff break room, chewing on her pencil and staring at a napkin full of numbers. She'd overheard a group of junior executives laughing in the elevator about a profit puzzle the CEO had posed, a problem that none of them had cracked for weeks. They joked about the bonus money riding on it, bragged that it was impossible without an MBA. Emily copied the numbers on her napkin, stuffed it in her hoodie pocket, and decided to give it a shot. Numbers made sense when people didn't. Her father peeked in while mopping near the vending machine. He asked if she wanted to go home. She shook her head, pointing at the napkin. He smiled but looked worried too. He didn't like her getting mixed up with the rich suits upstairs. Emily just wanted to test herself, prove she could solve the same puzzles they bragged about. Her dad kissed her on the head, muttered that she was her mother's brain and his backbone. When he left, Emily scribbled formulas on the back of her old math notebook until the napkin's riddle slowly started to crack open. By midnight, her pencil was dull and her mind buzzed with numbers, but the pattern was clear. She found the gap in the projections, a tiny error that spiraled into thousands lost each quarter. She grinned at the absurdity. A problem worth a corporate bonus, solved by a girl with grease under her fingernails from helping her dad fix an old truck last weekend. She knew she couldn't keep it to herself. Something in her gut told her she needed to say it out loud, even if no one would believe her. She tucked the solution in her backpack and zipped it shut. The next morning, Emily slipped into the back row of the interns' orientation meeting. The big conference hall smelled like fresh coffee and new laptops. Rows of new faces in crisp shirts and shiny shoes stared at a massive projection screen where Richard Hawthorne, the CEO of Stonebridge, paced like a king in his castle. He talked about efficiency, profit, and innovation like they were secrets only the privileged deserved. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Her dad was somewhere outside, buffing fingerprints off the lobby doors, while she sat there with her father's name stitched on her hoodie. Hawthorne spotted her from across the room, eyes flicking from her hoodie to her scuffed sneakers. He paused his speech and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, if housekeeping was lost. The interns chuckled politely. Emily stood her ground, voice shaking but strong enough to say she had the answer to his profit puzzle. The CEO laughed, a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the glass walls. He beckoned her forward, saying if the janitor's daughter really had a solution, they'd all love to hear it. He motioned for someone to call her father in too, just for the show. Robert Carter shuffled in, mop handle still in hand, confusion written all over his tired face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Hawthorne cut him off with a wave. Emily's cheeks burned, but she didn't back down. She told him she'd only need 5 minutes at the whiteboard. Hawthorne handed her the marker with a smirk, the interns snickering behind their sleek laptops. Her father's eyes met hers, full of worry and apology, like he wished he could shield her from the laughter. Emily gripped the marker tighter and turned to the board, blocking out the echo of the CEO's mockery. She wiped off the half-finished scribbles left from some old projection and began writing. The board squeaked under her careful strokes as she rebuilt the problem from scratch. Every digit landed like a promise that she belonged here just as much as anyone in $1,000 suit. She could feel the eyes behind her, some amused, some curious, some flat-out dismissive. She could almost hear her mother's old voice saying, "Don't let them shrink you, Emmy." Her father shifted by the door, mop leaning on his shoulder, watching his daughter do what he'd always known she could do. Emily's hand didn't tremble once. Her mind raced through the final steps, lining up the last calculation that proved exactly where the company was bleeding money. She paused, capped the marker, and turned around to face the stunned room. Her father stood frozen, pride battling fear in his eyes. When the CEO's smirk faded, Emily didn't say a word. Her work spoke for itself in black and white. She didn't care if they laughed yesterday. She'd made sure that today, no one in that glass tower could look away from the janitor's daughter who dared to stand at their whiteboard. The conference room was frozen for a moment that felt like forever. Richard Hawthorne, the CEO who'd laughed the loudest, stood so still. His expensive pen almost slipped from his hand. Emily Carter held her breath, waiting for someone to say she was wrong, that she'd embarrassed her father for nothing. But no one spoke. Instead, a young analyst nearest the front opened his laptop and tapped furiously, double-checking her numbers. His brow furrowed deeper with every click. He looked up at Hawthorne and gave the smallest nod. Emily's father squeezed the mop handle so tight his knuckles turned white. Richard tried to laugh again, but it caught in his throat this time. He cleared it with a cough that fooled no one. One of the interns dared to whisper to another, but the room was otherwise silent, except for the hum of the projector and the steady drip of water falling from Robert Carter's mop head onto the glossy tile. Emily didn't gloat. She simply stepped aside, marker still warm in her hand. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, a wild drum that matched the voice in her head, reminding her this was her father's moment too. She looked back at him. Robert Carter stood there in his faded work shirt, eyes glassy, his reflection shimmering against the polished conference wall. For years he'd cleaned these floors so other people could stand at this board. Now, his daughter had turned it into a stage no one could ignore. Hawthorne stepped forward, trying to recover his authority. He said something about luck, that maybe she'd seen someone's notes. Emily shook her head. She pulled out the napkin, unfolded its wrinkles, and showed him the original numbers she'd copied by ear, her neat pencil scratch circling the floor he'd missed. One of the interns shifted uncomfortably, glancing from Emily to the CEO. Nobody dared laugh now. Hawthorne stared at the napkin, then at the spotless board, where his prize puzzle had come undone in 5 minutes of quiet brilliance. Robert cleared his throat, voice low and steady as he told the CEO that his daughter didn't cheat. She worked hard and listened better than any man in that room. His words trembled, but they didn't break. Emily felt her heart swell as her dad placed a protective hand on her shoulder. The mop leaned forgotten against the wall. The CEO straightened his suit, trying to salvage control. He asked Emily if she'd ever considered an internship. The question sounded forced, the words caught between pride and bruised ego. Emily blinked at him, her father's hand still warm on her back. She asked if that offer would have come if her father hadn't polished his floors for 20 years. The interns didn't dare look at each other now. A few stared at the board, some down at their shoes. Hawthorne cleared his throat again and said they could discuss terms. Emily simply nodded once, but didn't thank him. When the meeting ended, her father walked her out past rows of glass offices where whispers followed them like shadows. He squeezed her shoulder, calling her Emmy like when she was little. She felt taller than the skyscrapers outside. At the staff locker room, Robert tucked the napkin into his breast pocket like a medal. He told her she'd always been meant for more than mops and buckets. She'd just proven it to the people who'd never seen her before. Emily hugged him tight, the smell of floor wax and cheap soap grounding her in a way no applause ever could. Word spread fast in the tower. By the next morning, Emily was sitting across from Hawthorne in his sleek corner office that smelled like leather and power. He spoke politely now, the laugh long gone. He asked about her grades, her plans, where she learned to do advanced profit analysis. Emily answered each question carefully, her dad's voice in her mind reminding her she didn't owe them her whole story. She told him she'd learned from textbooks borrowed from the library, from old ledgers her dad brought home, and from staying up late when the rest of the world was asleep. By the time she stepped out of that office, an official internship offer sat in her backpack. It wasn't charity, it was earned, and she knew it. She walked down the marble hallway beside her father, the same floor he'd cleaned the night before. She didn't feel small anymore. Every reflection in the polished walls seemed to echo a future she could touch now. Her dad told her he'd still clean those floors, but he'd do it with pride, knowing people would see his daughter's name on office doors someday, not just on a badge pinned to an old hoodie. As they stepped into the warm afternoon light outside the tower, Emily Carter glanced back at the glass building. She could see her own faint reflection, the ghost of every doubt she'd carried flickering in the sun. She pulled her father's old lunchbox tighter under her arm and promised herself she'd never forget where she came from. She'd keep solving problems no one wanted to solve, keep proving people wrong, until they stopped underestimating girls who carried mop buckets and math notebooks in the same bag. Beside her, Robert Carter smiled at the city he'd scrubbed clean for years.